Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Power of Prescription session. My name is Phil Nadlin, and I will be your moderator. Now, before we jump in, I have a few quick items. First, I would ask that if you could please enter any questions you have during the presentation into the chat function. We have some time at the end to cover them off. And then we will be sharing the QR code with everyone on the screen so you can collect your CEUs for attending today. So, we're very lucky to have Christina Prelaz speak to us on the value of using variable rate prescriptions in field and highlighting some examples using Climate FieldView from this past year. Christina is the field product specialist with our digital farming solutions team. Growing up on our family cash crop and vegetable farm in southwestern Ontario, Christina had a strong passion for agriculture, even from a young age. And although she didn't know what aspect of agriculture she wanted a career in, she knew she wanted to be involved. After completing her Honours Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Guelph, she dove into the space of digital ag. As the field product specialist for Canada, Christina works with our digital farming solutions team to test new products and procedures. She partners with field and R&D teams to deliver protocols and science-driven insights to derive models. She loves the balance between her time spent with farmers in the field using the technology and the internal team working behind the scenes. And I can tell you from my own personal experience that Christina is always willing to help and amazing at answering any questions, no matter how small or how often. And believe me, I bother her a lot, very often, in fact. So she's always there and continues to help guide our team, and she's become a really valuable part of the group. Now, when she's not working with the Bear team or on her family farm, Christina enjoys riding horses, skiing, biking, and spending time with family and friends. So with that, please welcome Christina Prelaz.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil, and good morning, everyone. Excited to be here. So through this next 20 minutes or so, we're going to dive into the space of global digital adoption. So where we're trending and where we can look forward maybe in the next 5-10 years. Then we'll break it down to Bear's strategic direction, knowing the global adoption rates. And then I'm going to jump back to this past season of 2022 and show you some examples of FieldView in the field and how we use prescriptions in our field trials. And finally, we'll have time at the end for question and answers. So as Phil said, we both like the question and answer, so feel free to put those in and we'll be happy to get to those at the end. So as I said, we're going to start broad and then I'm going to narrow your focus down. By starting broad, I want to bring your attention to the 4 mega trends globally. The first one should really come as no surprise to you, and that's a growing population. We hear this all the time, but really what we want to break it down to is what is the agricultural response and what can we do in our industry to help adapt and go forward with this mega trend. So if we look at a growing population, we look at over 2 billion people by 2050. With that comes the need for food, but also feed for livestock and other industries. In terms of what we're doing in agriculture, how that's going to impact us, we're really going to need to bring efficient yields. So being able to produce more on that same piece of land to increase our yields and feed a growing population. The second one that goes hand in hand with that is a change in consumption. Again, probably not a surprise to many of us, as we see this on the news in the grocery store, and just buying procedures are changing year over year. In this mega trend, what we're really looking at is the difference in animal protein consumption. Now, today I'm going to be talking about cropping and I'm going to be talking about scripting. So maybe you think this doesn't apply to this session. However, what we're looking at here is alternative solutions. So how can we think outside of the box? How can we meet our growers' needs? And how can digital play a role in that? The third mega trend is pressure on ecosystems. This is the buzzword you hear all the time, and that's climate change. So as we look forward in the next 5, 10, 15 years, will there be harvest losses from climate change? Studies show there will be, but what can we do as an industry? There will also be loss in arable land. I think this goes hand in hand, as we know, with a growing population. City centers are getting bigger and we're using farmland to development. In terms of our response to that, we're going to need to be able to manage risk and mitigate them. So we know that climate change maybe isn't something that we can control or we can't slow down at a fast enough rate. So how can we make sure that we're able to manage this risk year over year? And finally, the fourth megatrend is advances in digital technology. So as we look at this, we think of precision agriculture, the space that we're going to dive in today, artificial intelligence, and really how can we go from inputs to outcomes. So again, this isn't going to take the boots off the ground. This isn't going to take away the farmer or the agronomist from the field, but how can we use technology and leverage those resources to just make our practices a little bit easier, more efficient, and be able to hit those four main demands that are coming our way. The similarity between all four of these megatrends is that we are going to be able to enable these with digital tools. So in order to combat these in the agriculture industry, we're really going to need to lean into digital. Here we can see an S-curve of the adoption of digital technology across different industries over time. So I'm going to draw your attention to that bottom line there. And again, this is over time. So at the bottom there of the trend, we can see agriculture in the dark green dot. So as you initially look at this, you're going to think, maybe it's not satisfying. We're at the bottom of the trend. It never feels good to be at the bottom of the barrel, right? But if we look at the top, there's things like media, finance, and insurance. So if we break it down to media for a little bit, that's over time. So if we think of different things that have evolved over time, for example, print ads are now into digital ads, social media platforms. It took us time to get there. That wasn't a step overnight. And I think that's going to be the same with agriculture. It's going to take time. And I would say if we look at the digital space in agriculture, we really only started diving into this in the last 5 years or so. So it's going to take some time. The question is how long it's going to take and if we're all able to jump on board and help this process. So keep in mind that S-curve as we get a little bit further and the growth that we have from here. Knowing where we stand today, really breaking it down to what is Bayer doing or what is FieldView doing to help growers adopt digital. In Canada, we looked at our customers' 5 top customer needs in terms of digital needs. So as we look at the FieldView platform, we know that we need to have agronomic insights that are easily identified opportunities for my operation. So it's great that you're collecting all of this data, but how can we help make decisions off of that data? And I think that's the number one question. As you jump into a digital platform, how is it serving you and your operation? And how can we really make those insights pop off the screen? We've identified this as something that we know we need to dive into. When we broke it down a little further, there's some things in the FieldView platform that we can think of. So for example, if you're already using it, you may be familiar with the region reports. You can simply draw a circle on your yield map and it's going to pull up the yield for that specific area. Wouldn't it be nice if we can expand this? Because that's really an insight that does pop off the page and is easy to use. If we look at trial data, many of you are doing trials on your farm. You may not plan for it to be a trial, but it ends up being a trial. So how can we pull that data into a simple analysis that's all in one place for you to use? Going back to region reports for a second, you're probably familiar with you're probably familiar that there's not an easy way to do applications right now. So if that was easier, would it make a difference on your farm? Some other things like year-over-year analysis, specific reporting. If you're into horticulture, maybe it's the gap reporting that you really need on your farm. And the big one that you're probably all looking at on the screen is profit maps and ROI functionality. So right now, FieldView is an agronomic platform, but how can we fit this customer need? So I didn't start off by saying we're going to build all these things in 2023. I started off by saying these are what we have identified that customers are wanting, what you guys would like in a digital platform. Our job now is to take this information and decide what we're going to own versus what we're going to partner with. As we look at the digital space in the next 5 years, most people are probably going to adopt more than one digital platform. There may not be a fit for just one platform on your farm because they're all specializing in different things. So how can we leverage our partners to be able to bring these insights to you and your farm? Now we're going to dive into variable rate. So I told you to keep in mind that S curve that I showed a little bit earlier, as it explained where we are in terms of digital as a whole. We're going to break it down into some precision aspects of digital space. You can see that all of them are listed at the bottom. So for example, there's drone imagery on this, inputs on drones. What I highlighted here is just the variable rate seeding, fertilizer, and pesticide. You'll also notice I highlighted GPS auto steer. And I wanted to call GPS auto steer out as this is one that we can all relate to or are familiar with. So if we look back a few years, in between 2013 and about 2015, 2016, you can see that steep rate of increase in that dark blue line of GPS auto steer. So think back to your operation, whether you were farming, whether it was your parents farming, a different generation, but you probably didn't have GPS on your farm. Maybe it was for those bigger operations or those more precision farmers. It wasn't a fit for you. If we fast forward to today, there's many of us that probably don't want to live without it. We can still farm without it, but it's a luxury. It makes our farming efficient and it really helps us on our operation. So again, that didn't happen overnight. That steep rate of increase was over a few years. A lot of people were skeptical before, but now a lot of people are on board. If we bring that over to VR pesticides, the green line there, you can see that the rate of increase over the next 2 or 3 years is pretty much the same as GPS auto steer. So as we sit here today and I go through an example, you may say, you know, this isn't a fit on my farm, or variable rate just isn't something that I want to try. I don't need this and I'm happy and content. If we sit here again in another 3 or 4 years, let's see if we're in the same boat or if we really started to adopt the technology. VR fertilizer, you can see, has trended upward already. Most of you are probably familiar or have adapted this technology on your farm. And then variable rate seeding, you can see, is trending upwards as well. When we look at variable rate planting, I think in our region in Eastern Canada, this has been something we've adopted with corn, but there are definitely other crops that this can fit in as well. So as I said, there's other things in the precision farming market. But if we look forward to the next 8 or so years till 2030, variable rate technology is projected to have the highest growth rate by technology in the precision farming market. That was a mouthful, but really if we break it down, look at other precision farming technologies. For example, look at drones, look at imagery, other things that are up and coming in our industry. Out of those, variable rate is really projected to have the highest growth rate, so the most adoption going forward. So that brings us to our second customer need that we identified for the Canadian market. And that's intuitive, easy to use scripting that simplifies creation and execution for all crops. The main thing here is really easy to use. It can be overwhelming. You're probably already collecting data on your farm, but how can we use this data, make it easy for you to do, and work with your partners on? We think about what this could mean. It could mean expand seed scripting functionality for other crops. So for example, if we look at it right now, there's lots of technology for corn scripting, but how can we maybe use that in soybeans, edibles, other crops that we could see a fit in? Ability to generate by historical yield data. So again, this is for corn, but could we maybe expand that into the other crops as well? And utilizing seeding layer for boundaries. So if we look at this, maybe there's some parts of your field that you left unplanted this year for some reason, or it just snapped out a little bit. So our boundaries change a little year over year. Maybe you have a fence row that you've taken out. Maybe sometimes you split the 100 acres between 2 sections, and then this year you're going to farm all as one. So how can we just simplify that creation for you? Again, as we look forward, We know that a barrier to maybe adoption of variable rate is that it's overwhelming. So as we look forward, we need to make sure that we're helping the farmer and helping you guys find an easy way to fit this into your farm. And then at the end of the day, once the script is executed, how can you find value in it? So how can you take it the next step? With that, I'm going to dive into a field example that we actually saw in season this year in Eastern Canada. So if you've never seen FieldView before, there's a lot of different pretty pictures on this screen. So I'm just going to break them down. On the far left, we see a field health image. This is FieldView's version of a satellite image, and this is a scouting image. So what it means, it really just breaks it down into 5 zones, and it's a measure of biomass in the field. So red simplifies low biomass, whereas dark green symbolizes high biomass throughout the field. It is just relative to this field boundary. So as I said, before you start, if you have a field boundary that has a house in it or a shed, it's going to throw this image off because it's going to take those as low biomass images. So before we start, we have to make sure we have a clean boundary and it's going to be representative of our field. The next image, that red and green image, is the prescription map that was created off of the field health image. So we used the biomass measurement in this field to create a fungicide prescription on soybeans. The red is areas where it was lower biomass and we were not going to apply a fungicide, so we turned it off at 0 rate. And the green areas is where the field had higher biomass or perhaps higher potential for disease, and that is where we were going to spray the fungicide on this field. The third map over is what was actually executed in the field. So you can see that's the as applied map, which is very similar to what we projected in our prescription map. So the equipment executed well there. And the final one is our yield map, which you're probably most familiar with and see throughout your crops as well. Now, these are all pretty pictures, but like I said, what do we do with this data? Before we go any further, it's important to realize that even though we're using technology, we're using satellite imagery to create scripts, we're not taking the boots off the ground or the way we work with our agronomists on a different level. So here is an example in the same field. And what we did is we actually went out and in those off zones, those red areas, went out and ground truthed it. So validating that where the script said do not apply the fungicide, that we agreed with that and plan to not apply a fungicide. So you can see that pin note, and that would have been in FieldView that you can easily drop in a location. So you can see there's not a huge significant difference, but maybe looking at this field, we were looking to save a little. You can also see the drone image that pairs with it. You can see a little bit of variability in the plant stand there. And then on the right side, you can see an area where there was high biomass. We were going to put the prescription on and again, validated that and ground truth that as well. So jump forward, we took this field health imagery map and created our prescription off of that. What does that mean, or what benefit can it bring besides just creating that pretty picture? In this example, we took the 2 bottom zones, so the yellow zone and the red zone, and those were the areas where we were going to turn the fungicide off at 0 rate. So you can see approximately 34% of the field was low biomass zone where we weren't going to spray. So that means approximately 34% less fungicide was applied on this field. Now, before you get on my case about using my assumptions, I will say I rounded these numbers. So I assume the cost of application was $10 and the price of Delero Complete in 2022, as well as the field acres. So if this whole field was roughly 68 acres and 34% of it we were not going to spray, that's about 23 acres that we weren't going to spray. So then if we look at our cost of application as well as the product and that amount, it's approximately $760 we can save. Now the next story is, did it pay off or did it tell the yield story? So in this field, we did put a check strip, which we always recommend to see and evaluate your scripts properly. So the high biomass zone, which was the area where we did apply the fungicide, you can see using a region report on FieldView, it yielded about 63 bushels per acre. Then if we jump down, again, this was the high biomass zone, but we actually turned the sprayer boom off in this area to validate our script. And the yield, so the unsprayed area, was 60 bushels per acre on average. So if we look at this, there's about a 3 bushel per acre difference in yield. Then if we break this down again and we assume the price of soybeans is $17 per bushel, and there's a 3 bushel yield difference, we can save about $51, or we can see a $51 per acre increase on the high biomass zone where the fungicide was applied. So maybe not a huge significant yield difference, but at the end of the day, if we're gaining yield and also saving money because we didn't do a blanket application, the question would be thrown back at you. Do you think this is a fit for your farm? Again, 3 bushels per acre maybe isn't significant to you, but let's look at this past season and let's dive into the 2022 environmental conditions. So this map can be found on the FieldView website for each of your fields. And what I did here is I just pulled it from the start date, and that was the planting date of May 25th for this field. And then the end date was the date that it was harvested, and that was October 5th. If you look at that orange line, that's the precipitation average, the 5-year average. The blue graph there is what we saw in 2022. So you can also see it called out July 19th was the date of application, and you can see it highlighted there. This graph is in millimeters, which I think many of you would tell me is out to lunch. So if we break it down, there's about approximately 6 inches less accumulated rainfall compared to the 5-year average. So overall, it was a dry year, which in those years, we're probably going to question if we would spray a fungicide. Something like scripting can help you answer that question and working with your agronomist. Overall on this field, disease pressure was low. So maybe we were thinking of not spraying a fungicide, but if we went and ground truthed it and saw those areas of the field that did have good yield potential, we really wanted to increase those. So the areas where there's higher plant stands and higher biomass. And finally, just to wrap up this field example, I just broke it down to simplify it here. If we look at those high biomass zones, we can assume that they have higher yield potential. So if we look at the yield in the higher biomass zone, which was roughly 63 bushels per acre by the price of soybeans, you can see that there's about $100 or so increase compared to the low biomass zone. So I think this can tie back to the 4 R's, putting our product where we need it, the right place, the right time, and the right rate, and really being able to have these sustainable practices used in our everyday farming. I showed you just one example of fungicide on soybeans, but there's so many more examples of where we can use scripting on our operations. So if you want, feel free to put it in the chat of other areas on your operation that you could see a fit for scripting. Here's a few that come to mind for me. And a couple things are the different crops we can use. So for example, is there a fit for planting in corn? So doing a variable rate planting density prescription. Fertility is a big one. Many of you are probably already doing this. And the big call out here in the middle, you can see agronomists. So working with those people who have experience on your farm, have experience with the different products, defining the right fit for your operation. Like I said, when it comes to variable rate, it can be overwhelming. When it comes to data, it can be very overwhelming. So we do have a team of field staff at Bayer, the Digital Farming Solutions team, where we actually will help you create using the digital tool. And if you need help getting that on a USB and out to your equipment, or help you answer some of those questions that you're maybe not sure of. So don't let digital be a barrier to trying new things on your farm. We do have a team to help. If you want help, feel free to ask your local Bayer rep that you know, and they can get you in touch with us, or feel free to scan the QR code. But our team is always happy to help position this and help you find the fit on your farm. And again, work with your retail and other partners to get the job done at the end of the day. So with that, I am going to hand it back over to Phil if there's any questions.
Thanks, Christina. That was awesome. Way to go. Before we jump into questions, Christina's got the QR code there for any CEUs that folks want to grab for the session today. And I'm happy to announce that we do have a prize to offer as well. So we've got a lucky winner. And this one is actually awesome. So the winner is Terry Phillips, who's also celebrating his birthday today. So happy birthday, Terry. You get a pair of comfortable yet fashionable gloves on your birthday. So thanks for joining, and a Bear rep will reach out with the details on how to get those to you. We do have a couple questions that are in the Q&A right now. So the first one is around, does FieldView have any guarantees on the accuracy of the imagery they are providing? And how does cloud cover and soil color impact the biomass image?
Yeah, for sure. A great question. So FieldView has a few different images. The one I showed with the 5 colors is what we call our scouting image, and that's relative to the field you're in. We also have one called the vegetation image, similar to an NDVI image showing the biomass, and those you can compare field to field. So those are on a scale. And then the final one is our true image, and that's where you're going to see if there is cloud cover on that field. So if there was a large percent of cloud cover, we would not send the image to your account. If it passed over and there's, a significant chunk missing, that one does not get sent to your FieldView account. If you think there's something else in the view, you can press the true image color, and then you would see what was actually taken. And sometimes, for example, we even see cloud shadows, which can be a main one, and you can kind of tease out those differences from there. So like I said, digital is great, but still use your expertise and your knowledge. And I also find it helps if you look over the number of images that you're getting. You can see if there was one outlier. So if you got an image on last week, this week, and the following week, you can see if all of one has a red zone. It's probably something going on with that image that you can check into. So checking those trends as well.
Thanks, Christina. Another question that was in the chat, actually. What is the preferred soil maps to use? And I assume that's for building scripts or doing some of these prescriptions.
Yeah, for sure. So you can underlay images in our platform. So as you're going in and creating a script, you can choose which images you would like to underlay. So you can put soil maps, past yield maps, field health imagery, whatever you would normally use to create your recommendations off or your script off, you can underlay. So if you have soil maps and that's how you would like to create a prescription, you can check out our partners on FieldView and you can use those. Or you can work with our FieldView staff to help you put in those layers that would be beneficial to you.
Okay, I don't see any more questions here. So I just want to say thank you again for the presentation. Thank you everybody for attending and for joining us. Please join us for the grower panel that's going to start at 11:15, so a quarter after here. And you can either join by clicking the join live session or go to the agenda and click on the grower panel and wrap up. So thank you all again and enjoy the rest of the Groundbreakers event.
Thanks, everyone.